The gold on Sarah Morgan's finger was cold, colder than the wind biting at her cheeks, colder than the fear lodged in her throat. 3 months since she'd buried Thomas, and the ring still felt like a part of her, a ghost of warmth on her shrinking finger. She twisted it, a nervous habit that did nothing to calm the frantic beating of her heart. The homestead was silent, too silent. Even the soft cries of her newborn twins, James and Mary, sounded swallowed up by the vast empty prairie. Thomas never met his children. He never knew. The letter she sent, full of hope and trembling excitement, had arrived at the mining camp 2 days after they pulled his body from the collapsed shaft. An accident, they'd called it. A terrible, tragic accident. Sarah knew better. She kept that letter, not the one she'd sent, but the one she'd found tucked away in Thomas's toolbox after the funeral. Its edges were soft from how many times she'd unfolded it, her eyes tracing the hurried, desperate scrawl. They know. You have to run, Sarah. Take the children and run. His dream had been this land. We'll build something of our own, he'd told her, his blue eyes shining brighter than the Minnesota sun they'd left behind. Something to pass down. Now that dream felt like a cage. Every shadow in the corner of the cabin looked like a man. Every gust of wind sounded like a horseman approaching. The community had been kind. Emma Anderson especially. Her own children were grown, and she'd taken to Sarah like a second mother, her steady hands guiding James and Mary into the world just 2 weeks ago, while a blizzard raged outside. You're not alone, she'd insisted, leaving bread and dried meat. But Sarah was alone, more alone than she had ever been in her life. The men who killed Thomas weren't the kind to leave loose ends. They'd be coming for what he'd found, for the map he'd hidden, for her. The decision to leave hadn't been a choice. It was a necessity. The morning dawned with a deceptive calm, a pause in the winter storms. She told herself it was for the twins, for the special tea Emma brewed that soothed their bellies. But that was a lie she told to the four walls of the cabin. The truth was she was running, fleeing for their lives. She bundled the twins against her chest, wrapping them in Thomas's old wool scarf. Inside the folds, tucked against their tiny bodies, was a small, heavy pouch in a folded piece of oilskin. The reason her husband was dead. We'll be fine, she whispered, her voice a fragile thing against the stillness. Your papa's watching over us. She ignored the other words from his letter. Don't trust anyone, not even our friends. The wagon was ready, loaded with the blankets and food Emma had brought. She tucked a lantern where she could reach it, praying she'd make it to the Anderson homestead before dark. As she urged the horse forward, the cold gold of her wedding ring flashed in the pale morning light. A storm's always closer than you think in Montana, Thomas used to say. She just never imagined the storm would have a human face. The snow began to fall within the hour. Not the gentle flakes of morning, but hard, angry pellets driven by a rising wind. Sarah knew she should turn back. The homestead, for all its ghosts, was shelter. But the fear of what was behind her was greater than the fear of what lay ahead. Just a little further, she urged the horse, its breath pluming in the frigid air. Emma's place was just beyond the creek. So close, the world was turning white, the familiar landscape disappearing behind a curtain of snow. The wagon wheels groaned, fighting the deepening drifts. It wasn't the wheel that broke. It was the world. The creek crossing was a trap. In the summer, it was a gentle stream. Now it was a sheet of ice dusted with a lie of snow. The first crack was a whisper, a faint, sickening pop that she felt through the floorboards of the wagon. Her blood ran cold. The second crack was a gunshot. It ripped through the air, and the ice in front of them exploded into a spiderweb of black lines. The horse screamed, a sound of pure animal terror that woke the twins from their fitful sleep. And then, the world fell away. The wagon plunged sideways, throwing Sarah against the rail. Icy water, black and hungry, rushed in, instantly soaking her heavy skirts, trying to pull her down into the depths. Her arms, locked around her babies, were the only anchor she had. Somehow she scrambled onto the tilting seat, pushing off the sinking wagon and onto the treacherous, cracking ice. The twins' cries were thin, sharp needles in the howling wind. Each step was a gamble. The ice groaned and splintered beneath her worn boots. She didn't look back at the horse, thrashing in its harness, its screams swallowed by the storm. She couldn't. She made it maybe 20 feet before her legs, numb with cold and shock, gave out. The bank was right there, a dark line against the snow, but it might as well have been a mile away. She collapsed, curling her body into a shield around her children. "Shh, my loves," she chattered, her teeth clicking together. "Mama's here." Her fingers were clumsy, useless things, but she managed to fumble with her cloak, trying to create a better seal against the wind. The cold was a physical thing, a predator sinking its teeth into her bones. The lantern. The thought was a flicker of light in her darkening mind. It was still hooked to the wagon seat, miraculously above the waterline. She crawled, her frozen skirts dragging, her hands screaming with pain as they scraped against the broken ice. She grabbed it, nearly weeping with relief. The matches in her pocket were wrapped in wax paper, a trick Thomas had taught her. It took 4 tries. Her frozen fingers refused to obey. On the 4th strike, a tiny flame bloomed. She cupped it with her body, guiding it to the lantern's wick. A small golden glow pushed back against the suffocating white. It was a beacon, a tiny, defiant shout into the storm that they were still alive. But for how much longer? Time lost all meaning. She huddled over her children, repeating Thomas's name. A prayer, a curse, a plea. The twins had gone quiet, too quiet. She forced her wooden fingers to touch their cheeks. They were still warm. They were still breathing. The lantern flame began to sputter, the oil running low. The wind howled, a mocking laugh. Sarah felt a strange peace settle over her, a dangerous warmth that she knew was the final lie the cold tells you before it takes you. Her eyelids grew heavy. The flame danced, and in it, she saw Thomas's smile. Just as her eyes drifted shut, she heard it. A sound that wasn't the wind. A steady, rhythmic crunching. Hoofbeats. She tried to lift her head, to call out, but her body was no longer her own. Was it real? Or was it just the last, cruel trick of a dying mind? She pulled her babies closer, one last time. "Just a little longer," she whispered into the scarf. The words lost on the wind. The lantern flickered and died. John Hawkins wasn't tracking cattle. The 3 strays from the Anderson ranch were an excuse, a story he told himself and anyone who asked. The truth was, he was hunting ghosts. 20 years he'd worked this land. He knew its language, the way the snow drifted, the way the winds spoke through the pines. But for the last few months, the land had been telling him a new story. A story of strangers, of claim jumpers and whispers of a big gold strike up near the Blackwood mines. The same mines where Thomas Morgan had his accident. The map in his saddlebag, the one his father had given him, was marked with more than just trails and landmarks. It was marked with memories. And one of those memories was of a man named Silas Thorne, a ruthless claim jumper his father had run out of the territory 2 decades ago. Thorne was back. John had seen his sign a week ago, not far from the Morgan homestead. So when Emma Anderson mentioned her missing cattle, John had volunteered to track them. It gave him a reason to be out here, a reason to ride the boundary of Sarah Morgan's land, a reason to watch. He'd known Thomas, a good man, but naive, too trusting for a place that could swallow a man whole. The storm was a good cover, for him and for them. Chief, his buckskin, stamped nervously, sensing the tension in his rider. The wind was a liar, carrying sounds from miles away, twisting them into something they weren't. But then he heard it, a sound that cut through the howl, faint but sharp. The crack of a rifle? No, it was different. More like the crack of a giant whip, like the river ice giving way. His gut tightened, the creek crossing. He spurred Chief forward, pulling the map from its case. His father's spidery handwriting ran along the creek's edge. Ice never tells the whole truth. Better a long detour than a short funeral. He was a mile away, maybe more. He pushed the horse harder, his eyes scanning the blinding wall of white. It was a fool's errand. In this weather, a man could ride in circles for days. Then he saw it. For just a second, a tiny pinprick of gold. A light. It was there, and then it was gone. He reined Chief in, his heart pounding. Was it real? He waited, his breath held tight in his chest. Nothing. The white was absolute. He could turn back. The sensible part of him, the part that had survived 20 Montana winters, screamed at him to go home. This wasn't his fight, but he thought of Thomas Morgan's wife, a woman he'd only seen once in town, her eyes full of the same hope his Catherine once had. He thought of the two new babies Emma had told him about. He thought of Silas Thorne. His father's voice echoed in his memory as clear as if he were riding beside him. The territory tests a man's character most when the choice is hardest. With a click of his tongue, he urged Chief forward, not toward the cattle tracks, but toward the memory of that light. He was no longer hunting ghosts. He was hunting a flicker of hope in the heart of a killing storm. He found the lantern first, a dark shape half buried in a drift. The glass was cold, the wick black. He'd missed it. He was too late. The thought hit him like a physical blow. He swung down from Chief, his heart a leaden weight in his chest. Then he saw her, a mound in the snow that could have been just another drift, but his trained eye saw the dark wool of a cloak. She was curled into a tight ball, a human shield. He knelt, his own fingers numb inside his gloves. "Hello?" His voice was swallowed by the wind. "Ma'am?" He reached out, his hand hesitating before it touched her shoulder. He expected the stiffness of death. Instead, the mound shifted, just a fraction of an inch, but it was enough. She was alive. He brushed the snow from her cloak and saw them. Two tiny faces, impossibly pale, tucked into the crook of her neck. He saw the old wool scarf and remembered Thomas Morgan wearing it last winter. He worked fast, his movements sure and practiced. Her skirts were frozen solid to the ground. Her arms were locked around the babies with a strength that defied the cold. "I'm here to help," he said, his voice low and calm, the way he talked to a spooked horse. "I'm not going to hurt them, but we have to go, now." He didn't know if she heard him, but as he gently pried her arms open, her grip loosened. He carefully lifted the twins first. They were terrifyingly light, their bodies limp. He couldn't tell if they were breathing. He tucked them inside his own heavy coat, their cold seeping through his layers, a chilling reminder of how little time they had. Then he went back for her. Lifting her was like lifting a statue carved from ice. He got her onto Chief, positioning her sideways in the saddle, and swung up behind, holding her secure against his body. Her cold was so profound it felt like it was draining the life from him. He gave Chief his head. There were no tracks to follow, no landmarks to see. Everything depended on the horse's instinct to find its way home. "Stay with me," he said, his lips close to her frozen ear. "Tell me your name." A moment passed, then a sound, barely a whisper. "Sarah." The simple act of speaking sent a violent shiver through her body. It was a good sign, a sign that her body was fighting back. "I'm John Hawken," he said, trying to will his own warmth into her. "Your babies, Sarah. What are their names?" "James. Mary." He could feel her consciousness slipping. Her head lolled against his chest. He had to keep her awake. He had to keep her fighting. "You're doing good, Sarah," he lied. "We're almost there." But as he looked out into the endless, swirling white, he knew his cabin was a lifetime away, and he started to wonder if he hadn't just found one person dying in the snow, but three. The ride to the cabin was a waking nightmare. Sarah drifted in a gray fog, anchored to reality only by the man's voice rumbling against her ear and the steady, rhythmic sway of the horse. The warmth at her back was a strange, foreign thing. "Tell me about them, Sarah," the voice insisted. "The twins. Keep talking." 2 weeks, she managed, her jaw aching with the cold. "He came first. James." The words were stones in her mouth. She was so tired. It would be so easy to sleep. "And Mary?" he prompted. "Is she the quiet one?" The question was a spark in the darkness. How could he know that? She forced her eyes open a crack. The world was a blur of white. "She listens." "A smart girl," he said. His arm tightened around her. "You gotta be smart to survive out here. Like their mother." Chief stumbled, and John's grip became a vice, holding her secure. Sarah felt a jolt of something that wasn't cold. It was fear, not for herself, but for the precious, silent bundles tucked inside the stranger's coat. Are they? She whispered, the question too terrible to finish. They're still with us, he said, his voice grim. But we need to hurry. He kept talking, his voice a lifeline. He told her about his cabin, about the stone fireplace his father had built, about the quilt his mother had sewn. He painted a picture of warmth so vivid she could almost feel it. She clung to his words, to the images they created, using them to build a wall against the encroaching darkness. Then the wind changed. The howling lessened, replaced by a low whistle. A dark shape loomed out of the snow. The cabin. We're home, he said. The two words of prayer. We made it. Getting inside was a desperate, clumsy struggle. The door was frozen shut. He had to put his shoulder to it, all while holding her. The cabin was dark, but a faint red glow from the fireplace promised life. He laid her on the bed, on the very quilt he'd described, and she felt a flicker of surprise. It was real. All of it was real. Then he unwrapped the babies from inside his coat. They let out a simultaneous, weak cry. The most beautiful sound Sarah had ever heard. Tears froze on her cheeks. He moved with an efficiency that was mesmerizing. Wood on the coals, the bellows pumping, and a hungry fire roared to life, pushing back the shadows. He started to work on her frozen clothes, his movements respectful but urgent. But as he pulled away the layers of wet wool, something fell to the floor with a soft, heavy thud. The leather pouch. John stopped. The firelight flickered across his face, and Sarah saw his expression change. The gentle rescuer was gone. In his place was a man with hard eyes, a man who had just found something he wasn't supposed to see. He picked it up. The pouch was heavy in his hand. He didn't need to open it to know what was inside. Gold, raw, placer gold. Far too much for a poor homesteader's wife to be carrying. He looked from the pouch to Sarah, and then to the oilskin map that had fallen with it. His eyes narrowed. He recognized the markings around Blackwood Canyon. He'd seen a map just like it once before, in the hands of a dead man, a friend of his, a prospector who'd been found at the bottom of a ravine 3 months ago. Another accident. The story she told herself, a desperate mother running from grief, shattered. This woman wasn't running from a ghost. She was running from something far more dangerous, and he had just brought it into his home. The twins began to cry in earnest, their hunger overriding their weakness. Sarah tried to sit up, her body screaming in protest. Please, she whispered, her eyes pleading. They need me. John didn't move for a long moment. The cabin, which had felt like a sanctuary, was suddenly a trap. The storm outside was no longer the only threat. The real danger was right here, lying in his bed, looking at him with the eyes of a cornered animal. Who was she? And what kind of trouble had just followed them home? He looked down at the tiny, crying infants, then back at their mother. He made a choice. He pushed the pouch and the map into his pocket and turned to the fire to warm some water, his back to her. Let's get your babies fed, he said, his voice flat and devoid of the warmth it had held before. Then you and I are going to have a talk. The warmth of the cabin was a cruel joke. It thawed Sarah's body but did nothing to melt the ice that had formed between her and her rescuer. He moved around the small space with a tense, quiet purpose, his every action screaming suspicion. He helped her with the babies, his touch gentle but impersonal. He avoided her eyes. When she was settled, nursing them under the thick quilt, he sat across the room in his father's rocking chair, the pouch of gold resting on the table between them. He cleaned his rifle, the rhythmic click-clack of the mechanism, the only sound besides a storm, and the baby's contented suckling. The silence was heavier than the snowdrifts piling up against the door. He was my husband, Sarah finally said, her voice thin in the fire-lit room. John didn't look up from his work. People don't die from mining accidents and leave their widows a fortune in gold. It wasn't a fortune, it was a beginning. His share. His share of what? He finally looked at her, his eyes pinning her to the bed. The claim he and my friend Abe were working? The one Abe fell off a cliff looking for? Sarah's blood ran cold. She had known Thomas had a partner, but she didn't know his name. She didn't know he was dead too. I don't know anything about that. Don't you? He stood up, his large frame filling the room, making it feel small and airless. He tossed the oilskin map onto the bed beside her. This map looks mighty familiar. Abe showed it to me before he died. Said he and his partner were onto something big. Something worth killing for, apparently. The accusation hung in the air. That she was involved. That Thomas had killed his partner for the gold. No, she whispered, shaking her head. The movement sent a wave of dizziness over her. Thomas wasn't a killer. He was a good man. Good men are dead all over this territory. He paced in front of the fire, the pouch of gold now in his hand, weighing it as if weighing her story. Silas Thorne is back in the territory. You know that name? Sarah flinched. The name from Thomas's last letter. The one who wanted the map. The one who wanted them dead. Her reaction was all the answer he needed. So you're not his partner, John said, his voice softer now, a sliver of understanding cutting through his suspicion. You're the prize. He stopped pacing and looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time since he'd found the gold. He saw the terror in her eyes, the sheer, bone-deep exhaustion. He saw a mother protecting her children. My husband is dead, Sarah said, tears finally breaking free and tracing hot paths down her cold cheeks. His partner is dead, and Silas Thorne thinks I have the one thing he needs to find their claim. He killed them, and he will kill us too, if he finds us. The truth was out, a raw, ugly thing lying bare between them. The story wasn't about a lost widow anymore. It was about a hidden treasure, a ruthless killer, and a woman and two babies caught in the crossfire. John looked from her tear-streaked face to the sleeping twins, their innocent faces a stark contrast to the danger that surrounded them. He had wanted to stay out of it. He had wanted a quiet life. But the storm hadn't just brought a stranger to his door. It had brought a war. He walked to the window and peered out into the swirling white. The tracks they'd made were long gone. For now they were safe, hidden by the blizzard's fury. But storms didn't last forever, and Silas Thorne was a patient man. John knew this because 20 years ago, Thorne had killed his father. He'd made it look like a hunting accident, but John had always known the truth. Thorne had wanted their land, their water rights. He'd been run out of the territory before he could get them, but the ghost of that crime had haunted John his whole life. He turned back from the window, his decision made. This wasn't just Sarah's fight anymore. It was his. The past had just crashed, bloody and vengeful, into his present. He picked up the pouch of gold and the map and put them securely in a locked chest at the foot of his bed. Get some rest, he told Sarah, his voice once again holding a trace of warmth. You and your children are safe here. He picked up his rifle, which was now clean and loaded. When this storm breaks, Thorne will come looking. We need to be ready. The cabin, their temporary sanctuary, had just become a fortress, and John Hawkins, the solitary rancher, had just become its guard. The storm raged for 2 more days. Inside the small cabin, a strange, fragile truce formed. The suspicion between John and Sarah was replaced by a shared sense of dread, a countdown to a battle they both knew was coming. They fell into a rhythm dictated by the needs of the twins. He chopped wood, kept the fire roaring, and melted snow for water. She cared for the babies, her strength slowly returning. They spoke little, but every shared glance, every small act of cooperation, was a thread weaving them together. Sarah watched him. She saw the way he handled the twins, his large, rough hands surprisingly gentle. He would walk the floor with a fussy James, his deep voice humming a tune that was more rumble than melody, and the baby would quiet instantly. He was a natural father, and the sight sent a pang of sorrow and something else, something she refused to name, through her heart. One evening, while Sarah was nursing Mary, John brought out a small, hand-carved wooden horse from the chest at the foot of his bed. The wood was smooth with age, its lines simple but perfect. Made this a long time ago, he said, his voice quiet. He didn't need to say who it was for. Sarah had seen the faded photograph of a young woman with a gentle smile that he kept tucked away. His Catherine. It's beautiful, she said. He held it out, and Mary's tiny hand reached for it, her fingers curling around one of the legs. A rare, sad smile touched John's lips. Seems she likes it. In that small moment, the wall between them crumbled a little more. They weren't just allies in a coming war. They were two people who understood the shape of loss. "He killed your father, didn't he?" Sarah asked softly. "Silas Thorne." John's jaw tightened. He nodded, his eyes fixed on the fire. "Made it look like an accident. Just like Thomas. That's his way. He takes what he wants and buries the evidence." He looked at her, his expression raw. "I was just a boy. I couldn't prove anything. All I could do was stay here, watch the land, and wait." "Wait for what?" "For him to come back. I always knew he would. A man like that can't stand to leave a prize behind." He looked around the cabin, at the sturdy walls his father had built. This was the prize then. Now, his gaze fell on the locked chest. Now it's something else. The storm began to die during the third night. The wind's howl softened to a whisper. They both knew what it meant. The clock was ticking. "He'll come to your homestead first," John said, staring into the dying embers of the fire. "When he finds you gone, he'll start asking questions. Someone will have seen you heading toward Emma Anderson's." "He'll go there," Sarah whispered, her blood running cold at the thought of the kind woman being in danger. "And Emma will tell him she hasn't seen you. She's tough, but Thorne can be persuasive." He stood and began to pace. "He'll know you're out here, somewhere between your place and Emma's. He'll find the wagon in the creek, and then he'll start searching every cabin and line shack in this valley." He stopped and looked at her. "Starting with this one, it's the closest." "What do we do?" Sarah asked, clutching the sleeping baby in her arms tighter. "We don't wait for him to find us," John said, his voice hard as iron. "We set a trap." He began to work, his movements precise and planned. He barred the single window with heavy planks from the inside, leaving only a thin slit to see and shoot through. He moved the heavy wood table to brace the door. He checked his ammunition, laying out the cartridges in a neat row. He was no longer a rancher. He was a soldier preparing for a siege. As dawn broke, painting the new snow in shades of pink and gray, John retrieved the oilskin map from the chest. He studied it, his finger tracing a route she hadn't seen before. "There's a cave system up in those hills," he said, pointing. "My father showed them to me. The entrance is hidden behind a frozen waterfall. You and the twins will be safe there." "And you?" "I'll be here," he said simply, "leading him away from you. This is my fight, Sarah. It always has been." "It's our fight," she corrected him. "He wants what I'm carrying. I won't run and leave you to die for me." He looked at her, at the fierce determination that had replaced the fear in her eyes. It was the same strength that had kept her and the twins alive in the storm. He saw the woman Thomas had loved, the woman who had faced down the Montana winter and won. A grim smile touched his lips. "All right then, but you do exactly as I say." He gave her a pistol, a small derringer that had belonged to his mother. He showed her how to use it, his hands covering hers, and a jolt of unexpected warmth passed between them. "There's another way out of this cabin," he said, pulling up a loose floorboard near the hearth. "A root cellar. It leads to a tunnel that comes out in the aspen grove behind the cabin. If he gets in, you run. You take the babies and you run for those caves and you don't look back. You understand?" Sarah nodded, her throat too tight to speak. The sun was higher now. The world outside was bright, silent, and clean. A beautiful day for a war. They didn't have to wait long. A single rider appeared on the ridge, a black silhouette against the brilliant white snow. He sat on his horse for a long time, just watching the cabin. Even from a distance, Sarah could feel the menace radiating from him. Silas Thorne. He wasn't alone. Two more riders appeared, fanning out to circle the cabin. John stood by his makeshift gun port, his rifle steady. "Stay away from the window," he commanded. Sarah huddled by the fire with the babies, the small pistol cold and heavy in her hand. She could hear the crunch of hooves in the snow as the men drew closer. Then a voice called out, smooth and pleasant, a terrifying contrast to his reputation. "John Hawkins, I know you're in there. I'm looking for a woman, a widow. She's got something that belongs to me. Send her out, and we'll leave you in peace." John didn't answer. "Don't be a fool, Hawkins. I know what she is. I know what she's carrying. It's got nothing to do with you or your dead father." The mention of his father sent a tremor of rage through John. He raised his rifle, took aim, and fired. Not at Thorn, but at the ground in front of his horse. The snow exploded. The horse reared, and Thorn fought to control it. The pleasant voice was gone, replaced by a snarl. "Have it your way!" The first bullet slammed into the cabin wall, splintering the wood just inches from Sarah's head. She screamed, throwing her body over the twins. The siege had begun. The cabin became a symphony of violence. Gunshots echoed in the small space, the smell of gunpowder sharp and acrid. Wood splintered around them as Thorn's men fired relentlessly at the windows and door. John was a different person. He moved with a calm, deadly grace, firing sparingly, but with terrifying accuracy. One of Thorn's men cried out and fell from his horse, clutching a wounded shoulder. The man's horse bolted, riderless, across the snow. "One down," John said, his voice flat. He reloaded, his movements economical, never taking his eyes off the figures outside. Sarah, huddled in the relative safety of the corner by the hearth, felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were watching a play. This couldn't be her life. But the scream of a ricocheting bullet and the dust motes dancing in the shafts of light where bullets had pierced the walls were undeniably real. The twins, blessedly, had been lulled to sleep by the rocking and noise. Or perhaps they were simply too young to comprehend the danger. They slept in their blanket-lined basket, a small island of peace in a sea of chaos. "He's trying to draw my fire," John muttered, squinting through the slit in the planks. "The other one is circling around back. He's going to try the root cellar." His words confirmed her worst fear. He had anticipated this. But there was a problem. The root cellar was their only escape route. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We changed the plan." He looked at her, his eyes blazing with an intensity that took her breath away. "Can you shoot?" I, I've shot a pistol before. Thomas taught me." "Good." He pushed the heavy table away from the main door. "They think I'm alone. They think you're a helpless woman. We're going to use that." He handed her his own heavy Colt revolver. "This has more stopping power. Stay here by the door. When I give the signal, you open it just a crack and you fire. Don't aim, just fire. The surprise will be enough." "And you?" "I'm going hunting." Before she could protest, he pried up the loose floorboard near the hearth. "Keep them busy," he said, and then he was gone, disappearing into the darkness below the cabin. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She was alone, alone with 2 sleeping babies and 3 killers outside. She crawled to the door, the heavy revolver shaking in her hand. She could hear the man at the back of the cabin cursing as he tried to pry open the cellar door. She heard Thorne shouting orders. Time seemed to slow down. Every second stretched into an eternity. Where was John? Then a scream from the back of the cabin, a choked, gurgling sound that was cut off abruptly. Silence. One of them was gone. John had found him. "Jedediah?" Thorne's voice called out, a note of uncertainty in it now. "Answer me!" Silence was his only reply. Sarah risked a peek through a bullet hole in the door. She saw Thorne and his remaining man looking toward the back of the cabin, their rifles raised, their faces etched with confusion. They were distracted. Then she heard it, a soft whistle from the aspen grove behind the cabin. The signal. Her hands were slick with sweat. Her breath came in ragged gasps. She thought of Thomas. She thought of her children. She rose to her knees, gripped the heavy iron latch, and pulled. The door creaked open. Thorne and his man spun around, their eyes wide with surprise to see not a cowering woman, but the black, smoking mouth of a revolver. Sarah squeezed the trigger. The gun bucked in her hand, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. She fired again, and again, not aiming, just sending a volley of leaden fury toward the men who had destroyed her life. Her wild shots did what John had predicted. They created chaos. Thorne's man screamed as a bullet tore through the fleshy part of his arm. He dropped his rifle and stumbled back. Thorne dove for cover behind his horse, firing blindly toward the cabin. But it was the opening John needed. He burst from the cover of the trees, a phantom in the snow, his rifle already at his shoulder. Before Thorne could react, John fired. The shot was clean, precise. Thorne's remaining man dropped in the snow and didn't move. Now it was just 2 of them. John Hawkins and Silas Thorne, the ghosts of the past, finally meeting in the present. Thorne, using his horse as a shield, fired back at John. The two men exchanged shots, their battle a deadly dance across the pristine snow. Sarah, her gun empty, could only watch in horror from the doorway. Then the twins woke up. Their cries, sharp and terrified, cut through the gunfire. The sound broke Thorne's concentration for a fraction of a second. He glanced toward the cabin door, a snarl of contempt on his face. It was the only opening John needed. He fired again. The bullet hit Thorne's horse, and the animal screamed and fell, pinning Thorne's leg beneath its weight. John advanced slowly, his rifle leveled. "It's over, Thorne." Thorne, trapped and wounded, laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "It's never over, Hawkins. You think this is about gold?" He spat on the snow. "This is about this land. The land your father stole from me. The land that should be mine." "My father never stole anything," John said, his voice dangerously low. "He built this place with his own two hands." "He built it on my claim," Thorne roared, trying to pull his leg free. He was reaching for the pistol on his hip. "Drop it, Thorne," John warned. But Thorne was fast. He pulled the pistol and fired. John felt a searing pain rip through his left arm. He stumbled, but didn't fall. He brought his rifle up and fired one last time. The sound echoed across the silent valley. And then, there was nothing but the wind and the crying of two babies. Sarah ran from the cabin, heedless of the cold, and rushed to John's side. Blood was pouring from his arm, staining the white snow a brilliant crimson. "It's just a graze," he grunted, but his face was pale. She ripped a piece of her skirt and began to wrap the wound, her hands finally steady. "You did it," she whispered. "It's over." He looked past her, at the bodies in the snow, at the cabin riddled with bullet holes. "Yeah," he said, slumping against her. "It's over." But as Sarah looked out at the vast, silent landscape, she knew he was wrong. It wasn't over. It was a beginning. The cavalry didn't ride in. There was no sheriff to congratulate them. In the territory, you were your own law. Justice was what you made with your own two hands. They buried the bodies in a deep ravine, letting the winter and the wolves erase the evidence of the battle. It was a grim, silent task. When it was done, John and Sarah stood looking out over the valley, the smoke from his cabin's chimney, a thin gray line against the blue sky. "What now?" she asked, the question hanging in the cold air. "Now," John said, his arm in a makeshift sling, "we go home." But the word felt different. Home was no longer his solitary cabin or her haunted homestead. Home was something new, something they had forged together in the crucible of fear and violence. Word travels fast in a place where people are the only news. Emma Anderson arrived the next day, her face a mask of worry. She'd heard the distant gunfire and had ridden out as soon as the trail was passable. She took one look at the bullet-scarred cabin, at John's bandaged arm, and at the fierce protective way Sarah stood beside him, and she understood. She didn't ask questions. She just bustled inside, took charge of the twins, and started making coffee. "Looks like you two have had a busy few days," was all she said. The community followed. They arrived in twos and threes, drawn by a mixture of concern and curiosity. They brought food, supplies, and something more valuable, their silent support. They saw the fortified cabin and knew a fight had happened here. They saw the way John Hawkins, a man who had kept to himself for 20 years, now stood as a guardian over the widow Morgan and her children. And they respected it. No one asked about the new graves. They just pitched in. The men patched the bullet holes in the cabin walls. The women helped Sarah, fussing over the twins and sharing quilting patterns, their gentle chatter a healing balm on the raw silence. In the midst of this quiet recovery, a decision was made. Sarah's homestead was too exposed, too full of bad memories. John's cabin, nestled in its defensible valley, was safer. It was decided, without ever being explicitly stated, that this was where she and the twins would stay. The days turned into weeks. The deep winter snows gave way to the spring thaw. And as the land came back to life, so did they. They found the mine. John, using the map, led a small party of trusted neighbors into the Blackwood Canyon. The claim was exactly where Thomas's notes said it would be, a rich vein of gold hidden away from prying eyes. It was legally Sarah's. The gold Thomas had died for would now secure his children's future. But Sarah found she cared little for the gold. Her treasure was in the small cabin. It was in the sound of her children's laughter. It was in the quiet evenings spent with John, talking by the fire, sharing stories of the people they had lost, and slowly, cautiously, building a new story together. One evening, as the setting sun painted the sky in fiery colors, John found her standing on the porch, looking out at the land. "I never thought I'd feel safe again," she said softly. "After Thomas died, the whole world felt like an enemy." John came to stand beside her. He didn't touch her, but she could feel his warmth, a steady, comforting presence. "This land can be hard," he said, "but it can be good too. It gives back what you put into it." "You put your life on the line for us," she said, turning to face him. "For strangers." "You weren't strangers," he said, his gaze intense. "Not really, I think. I think I've been waiting for you." The admission was a stark, beautiful thing. He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "Catherine, my wife. She always said the heart was like a homestead. Sometimes a fire comes through and burns it all down to the ground. But if the soil is good, something new will always grow." "Is the soil good, John?" she whispered. His answer was a kiss. It wasn't a kiss of passion, but of promise. A kiss that spoke of shared loss, of survival, and of the stubborn, resilient hope that life could begin again. They were married in the fall, in the aspen grove behind the cabin. The whole territory came. Emma Anderson held the twins, who were now sturdy toddlers. James with his father's serious eyes, and Mary with a smile that could melt the winter snows. They combined their properties, joining the Morgan homestead with the Hawkins Ranch. They called it the Double Heart Ranch, a name that honored the two loves that had brought it into being. John legally adopted the children, giving them his name, but he never tried to replace their father. He told them stories of Thomas, of his bravery and his dreams, ensuring that his memory was a blessing, not a ghost. Years passed. The ranch prospered. Two more children were born, their laughter filling the cabin that had once known only silence. The story of the siege became a local legend, a tale told around winter fires, a testament to the toughness of the people who called that land home. One winter evening, 5 years to the day after the storm, Sarah sat by the fire, watching her children play. John came in, flakes of snow melting in his hair, and handed her a small, awkwardly wrapped package. Inside was the little wooden horse he had carved so long ago, and beside it, a new carving. A woman holding two babies, her face turned toward a cowboy who stood guard beside her. "Some storm," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he knelt beside her chair. "Bring the greatest blessings." Sarah looked at her family, at the love that filled their small home, and knew he was right. The storm had taken everything from her, but it had also delivered her to this shore, to this man, to this life. It had blown her right where she needed to be. If you enjoyed this story of survival and second chances, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You never know when the next storm is coming, and you won't want to miss the stories of the people who are strong enough to walk through them.